Like many people, I heard about 9/11 by just turning on my television that morning and seeing every channel tuned to the Twin Towers. And I think I was on the West Coast at that point and came to it late. I think the second tower had already been hit, but much of the footage I was seeing was starting with the first tower, and obviously the implications of a second plane hitting the building. It wasn't hard to interpret what was happening there. It wasn't until that moment that this was absolutely clear that it was an act of terrorism as opposed to just some terrible catastrophe. I shared everyone's horror at that moment, and it really was the first moment in my life where I realized viscerally, as a matter of my emotional engagement with the facts, not just as an abstraction, that we are living in history, that the kinds of things you read about in history books are the kinds of things that are still happening, and these include whole societies unraveling and civilizations falling and the good people losing to the bad people, and evil triumphing for a generation or more. My default expectation of just endless progress, really outside the vicissitudes of history, that expectation broke down, where I just saw that it's possible for things to go really wrong in this world, and for people to not have the courage to defend civilization from its genuine enemies, and that more importantly, that such enemies exist. Right? I mean, you're lulled into in the context of a privileged and liberal upbringing, where that you really are in a society where abundance, it can be more or less taken for granted, where even the poorest people have lives that are nothing like the chaos you see in a famine-ravaged region of Africa, or where the idea of a civil war is no longer thinkable, right? So you live in that kind of society, and it's very easy to think that, well, it's just a matter of making more and more progress, and nothing truly terrible is going to happen. But September 11th really inscribed a new framing onto my brain, which is, I think, is probably the right one, and has always been the right one, which is that it's possible for human stupidity, to, at least locally, to triumph, and it's possible for bad actors, increasingly with the power of technology, it can be tiny numbers of bad actors, to strike a blow against civilization which takes a generation or more to recover from. And so what I worry about now are largely our capacity to overreact to things like September 11th. I mean, when you look at what September 11th did to the West, we have fought multi-trillion-dollar wars, and with no end in sight. I mean, we have stepped out of these conflicts to a large degree, but that doesn't mean that the problem has gone away at all. And just the fecklessness and inconclusive nature of our response to the problem of global jihad is something we're very much living in the midst of now. And again, there is no end in sight, and we are just waiting for the next thing that is, September 11th magnitude or worse, to totally destabilize us again. And I really have no illusions about how bad our reaction or overreaction or ineptitude might look in the aftermath of the next big event. That's something that we have to price into the problem. I mean, many people have made this observation that if September 11th had been caused by a hurricane, right, if 3,000 people that day had been killed by a hurricane, well, that would have been something that it would have been a tragedy. We would have declared it a disaster area. We would have thrown money at the problem. We would help people recover. But this wouldn't have deranged human history for a decade and a half. And you could argue that our reaction to terrorism should be more like that than it is. I mean, they're not obviously analogous problems. I mean, terrorism is born of ideas that spread, and ideas that beget further acts of terror. And every hurricane is just a local event that has no implication for what's going to happen in the future. But one could argue that our reaction to human-caused disasters